All right, we are going to do a confidence interval here when we have a statistic that's a proportion. So it says a recent study, 36% of adults in the United States could name all three branches of government. Simple random sample of 1,416 U.S. adults. We're going to create a 95% confidence interval and then say whether or not we have enough evidence that less than half of the U.S. adults could name all three U.S. branches. So let's just make sure we get some things out the way. One, our proportion, our sample proportion is going to be 36% of adults. Our sample size is going to be 1,416 adults. And again, we are going to be using a 95% confidence interval like we have been doing. So the way we'll start this one is we will have 1.96, which is our z-score for a 95% confidence interval, times the square root of our sample proportion. 36% can be rewritten as 0.36. That's going to be multiplied by 1 minus our sample proportion, which is 0.36. If you chose to put 0.64 there instead, that's the same exact thing. That's perfectly fine. This is going to be divided by our sample size, which is 1,416. When I plug this into my calculator, I get approximately 0.025. So this right here, this 0.025, that is going to be my margin of error. So then what do I do with my margin of error? I go ahead and I'm going to add and subtract this from my sample proportion. My sample proportion again being that 36%. So I will have 0.36 plus or minus 0.025 to create my confidence interval, which when I do that, I will get 0.335 to 0.385. So that would be my confidence interval. As a decimal, we can also rewrite that as a percentage if we would like, because we remember we can convert decimals to percentages. That's what we're using with this proportion here. So I don't want to write out the whole thing, but we can say something along the lines of we're 95% confident our interval will be between 0.335 and 0.385, or 33.5% and 38.5%, that Americans cannot name all three, or could name all three branches of government. Sorry, I got to reread the question. And in terms of if this is convincing evidence that less than half the U.S. adults could name all three branches of government, this would be convincing evidence because of the fact that this number, or our interval, is less than half, so therefore that's true, and we can say that that works. So again, this is how we would first calculate our margin of error. We would take our z-score of 1.96, multiply that by the square root of our proportion minus 1 minus proportion divided by our sample size, and once we get our margin of error, we add and subtract it from our sample proportion.